What has been called the crime and the trial of the century is over. The Yorkshire Ripper has been given a life sentence.
The police currently have 8 formal allegations against Sir Jimmy Savile, 2 of rape and 6 of indecent assault.
He controlled organised crime in the East End of London in the 60s. Both were jailed for life in 1969 after being convicted of murder.
Ronnie Cray died in hospital 2 days after collapsing in Broadmoor prison, where he'd been since 1969.
Jimmy Savile was a man who used the cover of celebrity to attack boys and girls, men and women, patients and staff. The youngest victim, just 5 years old.
And the subsequent trial of Peter Sutcliffe are by no means finished with. A jury has decided that the Ripper was a monster, not mad, but evil.
Hi, welcome to True Crime Time. I'm your host Ruby Ridgewell, and today we're going to be talking about Britain's oldest and most infamous psychiatric hospital, Broadmoor. Broadmoor was opened in 1863 and was originally known as the Broadmoor Criminal Lunatic Asylum. The original building plan of 5 blocks had 4 for men and 1 for women, and was completed in 1868. A further male block was built in 1902. During the First World War, Broadmoor's Block 1 was also used as a prisoner of war camp called Crown Thorne War Hospital for mentally ill German soldiers. John Strafford was a serial killer who was the longest serving prisoner in British history. After killing 2 young girls in the summer of 1951, he was committed to Broadmoor, and in 1952 he managed to escape. In the 24 hours he was at liberty, he managed to kill 5-year-old local child Linda Bower. After Linda Bower's death, the hospital set up an alarm system, which is activated to alert people in the vicinity, as well as the public, including those in the surrounding towns of Sandhurst, Wokingham, Bracknell and Bagshot, when any potentially dangerous patient escapes. It's based on the Second World War air raid sirens, and a 2-tone alarm sounds across the whole area in the event of an escape. Until 2018, it was tested every Monday morning at 10 AM for 2 minutes, after which a single all clear tone was sounded for a further 2 minutes. All schools in the area must keep procedures designed to ensure that in the event of a Broadmoor escape, no child was ever out of direct supervision of a member of staff. Because of its high walls and other visible security features, and the inaccurate news reporting it's received in the past, the hospital is often assumed to be a prison by members of the public. Many of its patients are sent to it via the criminal justice system, and its original design brief incorporated an essence of addressing criminality in addition to mental illness. However, the layout inside and the daily routine are designed to assist the therapy practiced there, rather than to meet the criteria necessary for it to be run along the lines of a prison in its daily functions. However, nearly all the staff are members of the Prison Officers Association, as opposed to other health services and unions such as the Royal College of Nursing and Unison. Broadmoor uses both psychiatric medication and psychotherapy, as well as occupational therapy. One of the therapies available is the arts, and patients are encouraged to participate in the Kessler Award Scheme. From its opening in 1863 until 1948, Broadmoor was managed by a Council of Supervisions, appointed by and reporting to the Home Secretary. Thereafter, the Criminal Justice Act of 1948 transferred ownership of the hospital to the Department of Health and the newly formed NHS. An oversight of the hospital went to the Board of Control for Lunacy and Mental Deficiency, established under the Mental Deficiency Act of 1913. It also renamed the hospital Broadmoor Institution. The hospital remained under the direct control of the Department of Health, a situation that reportedly combined notional central control with actual neglect, until its establishment of the Special Services in 1989, with Charles Kay as its first chief executive. Alan Franey ran Broadmoor from 1989 to 1997, having been recommended for the post by his friend Jimmy Savile, His leadership was undermined by persistent rumours of sexual impropriety on the hospital grounds. Allegedly, he ignored at least 3 sexual assaults that he'd been informed about. The Special Hospital Service Authority was abolished in 1996, being replaced by individual special health authorities in each of the high-security hospitals. The Broadmoor Hospital Authority was itself dissolved on the 31st of March 2001. From at least 1968, the television presenter and disc jockey Jimmy Savile undertook voluntary work at Broadmoor Hospital and was allocated his own room, supported by Broadmoor's CEO Pat McGrath, who thought it would be good publicity. In 1987, a minister in the Department of Health and Social Security, Baroness Trumpington, appointed Jimmy Savile to the management board in charge of Broadmoor Hospital. He was being referred to as Dr. Savile by both the Department of Health and Social Security, Broadmoor staff and residents, despite having no medical qualifications or training. In August 1988, following a recommendation by Cliff Graham, the senior civil servant in charge of mental health at the DHSS, Savile was appointed by the Department of Health Minister Edwina Currie to chain an intermark task force overseeing the management of the hospital, following the suspension of its board. Currie privately supported Savile's attempts to blackmail the Prison Officers Association and publicly declared her full confidence in him. After an ITV1 documentary, The Other Side of Jimmy Savile, aired in October 2012, allegations of sexual abuse by Savile were made, or remade, by former patients and staff. The civil servant who first posted Savile's appointment in the task force for Broadmoor, Brian McGuinness, who ran the mental health division at the DHSS in 1987, before Cliff Graham, has since been investigated by the police and prevented from working with children. A Department of Health investigation led by former barrister Kate Lampard into Savile's activities at Broadmoor and other hospitals and facilities in England, with Bill Kirkup leading the Broadmoor aspects, reported in 2014 that Savile had used a personal set of keys at Broadmoor from 1968 to 2004, which were not formally revoked until 2009, with full, unsupervised access to some wards. 11 allegations of sexual abuse were known. This is thought to be a substantial underestimate, due to how psychiatric patients in particular were disbelieved or put off from coming forward. In 5 cases, the identity of the alleged victim could not be traced, but the other 6 were concluded and they had been abused by Savile repeatedly in the case of 2 patients. The investigation also concluded that the institutional culture in Broadmoor was previously inappropriately tolerant of staff-patient sexual relationships, and that when there were female patients, they were required to undress and bathe in front of staff members, and sometimes visitors. A shocking failure to ensure a safe or therapeutic environment for female patients had already been revealed in a 2002 inquiry, prior to Broadmoor becoming male-only. In 2010, a female charge nurse received a suspended prison sentence for engaging in sexual activity with a patient at the hospital. On the 1st of April 2001, West London Mental Health Trust took over the responsibility for Broadmoor Hospital. The Trust reports to the NHS Executive through the NHS England London. The former director, who then became the CEO of the Trust, quit in 2009 after Healthcare Commission's and Care Quality Commission's findings of serious failures to ensure patient safety at Broadmoor. In 2014, the Director of Specialist and Forensic Services resigned, just prior to the conclusions of an investigation into a bullying culture. The next permanent CEO resigned in 2015, in the wake of a poor Care Quality Commission's finding and other problems in the Trust. The new head of security was appointed in March 2013, John Hunerium, who had 30 years' experience in Scotland Yard and had worked as a bodyguard for members of the royal family. Meanwhile, the Trust allowed ITV to film a 2-part documentary within Broadmoor in 2014. Press releases stated that on average there are 4 assaults per week on staff. psychiatrist Alman Basu, clinical director of Broadmoor since March 2014, promoted the documentary, but then decided to leave the NHS in 2015 amidst funding and staffing problems, despite the Trust having just highlighted investment in his skills through his prestigious initiative to improve the quality of patient care in the NHS. Broadmoor is one of 3 maximum security psychiatric hospitals in the UK, the others being Ashworth and Rampton, but it's always received the most interesting cases, meaning that psychiatrists and doctors compete to work there. Despite the many infamous patients held at the hospital, like Ronnie Cray, Ian Brady and Peter Sutcliffe, perhaps the most notorious is one who few of Broadmoor's residents ever saw, the real-life Hannibal Lecter. Robert Maudsley was in Broadmoor for 3 years in the 70s. Born in 1953, he was the son of a Liverpool lorry driver who beat him mercilessly whenever he came home from the orphanage which had taken him into its care. He drifted through foster homes and psychiatric hospitals. By 1973, he was a rent boy, picked up by a labourer who showed him pictures of abused boys. Maudsley garroted him and was sent to Broadmoor with the new nickname, Blue, which was the colour of the labourer's face when he was slowly choked to death. His next and most lasting nickname was Spoons. In 1977, Maudsley and another patient took a third patient, a paedophile, and barricaded themselves in a cell with him. The paedophile was tortured for 9 hours before Maudsley garroted him and held up his body so that the staff could see through the spy hatch. When the staff were let in, they found that the man's skull had been cracked open like a boiled egg, with part of the brain missing and a spoon hanging out of the cranium. Strangely, Maudsley was deemed fit to stand trial after this crime. Despite his plea to be sent back to Broadmoor, he was committed to Wakefield Prison. After several more killings, Maudsley now lives in solitary confinement in a 2-cell glass cage, very like the one pictured in Silence of the Lambs. His furniture is made of compressed cardboard, and on his 1 daily hour of exercise, 6 prison officers have to escort him. Notorious gangsters Ronnie and Reggie Cray were convicted of the murders of George Cornell and Jack the Hat McVitie in 1969 and sentenced to 30 years. A decade later, Ronnie was diagnosed with schizophrenia and moved to Broadmoor, where he was soon living in the lap of luxury. His room was carpeted, with cushions on the bed. He ordered his own curtains, had pictures of his parents, brothers and old friends, and even some boxing memorabilia on display. He loved music so much he was even allowed to have a record player in his room. Maureen Flanagan, a longtime family friend of the Crays, recalls her visits to Broadmoor with Ronnie's older brother, Charlie Cray, and says, "He was immaculately dressed in an Italian suit, white starched shirt, beautiful Italian silk tie, and a Hankley gold watch." After that, Maureen took a tailor into the hospital every October to measure him for a new suit. The tailor had to measure him in the visiting hall. She said he had the finest Italian silk shirts, silk socks, and the most beautiful cufflinks that people would send in as presents. During visits, Ronnie and his guests were served tea and cakes on fine china by a butler in a smart white jacket, and his Friday night meal was a pork pie that was delivered by Harrods every week. The butler Maureen spoke about was actually double murderer Charlie Smith, who knew it was better to stay on Ronnie's good side. To pass the time, Ronnie took up gardening, spending 4 mornings a week attending the extensive grounds, as well as painting and writing poetry. Ronnie was nicknamed the Duke of Broadmoor and the Colonel. He was the top dog in Broadmoor, but had little time for many of the patients, especially Peter Sutcliffe. Ronnie couldn't stand anybody that would hurt women and children. He believed you shouldn't even swear in front of them. The Cray twins ordered 2 vicious attacks on Peter Sutcliffe. The notorious gangsters supposedly hated Sutcliffe for his vile crimes against women. One attack saw Sutcliffe slashed across the face with a broken coffee jar, which left him needing 30 stitches across his face. Another saw him stabbed 10 times in both eyes with a ballpoint pen, resulting in him going blind in one eye and severely damaging the other. Peter William Sutcliffe was born on the 2nd of June 1946. He was an English serial killer who was dubbed the Yorkshire Ripper by the press. On the 22nd of May 1981, he was found guilty of murdering 13 women, with his youngest victim being only 16 years old, and attempting to murder 7 others between 1975 and 1980. He was sentenced to 20 concurrent life sentences, which were converted to a whole life order in 2010. 2 of Sutcliffe's murders took place in Manchester. All the others occurred in West Yorkshire. Sutcliffe initially attacked women and girls in residential areas, but appeared to have shifted his focus to red light districts, because he was attracted to the vulnerability of prostitutes. He had allegedly regularly used the services of prostitutes while in Leeds and Bradford. After his arrest in Sheffield by South Yorkshire Police for driving with a false number plate in January 1981, Sutcliffe was transferred to the West Yorkshire Police, who questioned him about the killings. He confessed to being the perpetrator, saying that the voice of God had sent him on a mission to kill prostitutes. At his trial, Sutcliffe pleaded not guilty, on the grounds of diminished responsibility, but he was convicted of the murder on a majority verdict. Peter Sutcliffe's was one of the largest and most expensive manhunts in British history, and West Yorkshire Police was criticised for its failure to catch Sutcliffe, despite having interviewed him 9 times in the course of its 5-year investigation. Sutcliffe was transferred from prison to Broadmoor Hospital in March 1984 after being diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Although he wasn't liked by many of the other patients, Sutcliffe struck up a sickening friendship with sexual predator Jimmy Savile in the late 1980s when they both found themselves residents of Broadmoor. Sutcliffe, however, was an inmate, and Savile was a charity hero with gold-plated keys to the gates. Jimmy Savile, who is estimated to have raped and molested more than 500 little girls, boys, and vulnerable women and men over a 50-year period, also called for Broadmoor inmates, including women killer Sutcliffe, to be allowed to have sex as part of their rehabilitation. Savile said, "All guys together or all girls together isn't very healthy. We have got to give our patients some reason to want to rehabilitate, and falling in love is one of the strongest." During Jimmy's stint in charge, he often invited his friends to have tours after hours at Broadmoor. The most well-known case of this is when he invited now well-known paedophile Rolf Harris to view Broadmoor and tour the grounds, late at night when patients were undressing and ready for bed. After his death in 2009, it was revealed that the Yorkshire Police hunting the Ripper had taken a mould of Jimmy Savile's teeth. They wanted to see if they were a match for bite marks found on one of the victims of the Yorkshire Ripper, Irene Richardson, who was only 28 years old. Savile's Leeds penthouse overlooked Roundtree Park, where Sutcliffe murdered Irene Richardson on the 5th of February 1977. There are numerous theories arguing that Savile was in fact the second Yorkshire Ripper, and that's why Savile and Sutcliffe had such an interesting friendship. Okay, sadly that's all for today, but make sure to tune in next week, right here, to find out more information about the gruesome crimes committed by Jimmy Savile and the charges of gross neglect Broadmoor Hospital faced. Thank you, goodbye!